let's take a look at wake turbulence, or wingtip vortices. Now, wingtip vortices occur because anytime an airplane is flying, there's high pressure underneath the wing, low pressure area on top of the wing, so the air from underneath the wing tries to make its way around the wingtip and join that low pressure area on top of the wing. Well, the problem is by the time these molecules make their way around the wingtip, the wing is gone. It isn't there anymore. So what you really get is these wake turbulence or wingtip vortices that come after the aircraft. Anytime an aircraft is producing lift, you'll have these wingtip vortices like so, and they occur worse when the airplane is at high angles of attack at the wingtips. Now, would you be at high angles of attack at the wingtips when the airplane is heavy or light? Well, when the airplane's heavy, you'd have the biggest angle of attack. How about when the gear and flaps up or down? Well, when the flaps are down, the airplane pitches down just a little bit, and the angle of attack at the wingtips is less. But when you remove the flaps, reduce the flaps, the airplane pitches up, and the angle of attack at the wingtips is higher. And when the airplane is slow, the angle of attack at the wingtips is greatest. So when do you have the greatest wake turbulence behind an airplane? Well, when the airplane is heavy, clean, and slow. Now, these vortices are a danger to you when you're flying in a little airplane and you're following a bigger airplane, because these can actually roll you upside down. Now, if you're flying at 2,000 feet and you get caught in wake turbulence and do an inadvertent roll, it scares the daylights out of you. But at 50 feet above ground level, it can ruin your whole doggone day. So you see this Boeing 747 equipped with smoke generators shows you how these vortices affect you as you're flying along in a little airplane following this airplane, and they can run your whole doggone day when you're in short final if you don't know how to behave around wingtip vortices. So the important thing to know is to know how these vortices work. First of all, they tend to sink behind the airplane. So if you want to avoid the vortices of a big airplane, you would want to fly above the altitude of the aircraft that's generating the wake turbulence. So they tend to sink down below behind the airplane. Also, you should need to know that when you get near the ground, they spread apart. So here you have the airplane generating lift. Anytime that there's lift on the wings, you have the wake turbulence. They sink behind the aircraft, and they spread apart. And the wind condition that requires maximum caution when you're avoiding wake turbulence is a light quartering tailwind. Now here's why. Let's assume that these vortices drift apart, as we said earlier, at about a rate of, we'll say, 5 knots. And let's assume you have a 5-knot quartering tailwind. Well, you can see what would happen. This upwind vortex could be held right over the runway. The downwind vortex would be blown away, and that's no problem. So, and you have a light quartering tailwind, the upwind vortex could be right over the runway, and that could be your most dangerous situation. So around an airport, watch out for a light quartering tailwind as far as vortices are concerned. Now, let's assume you're landing behind a large aircraft. What should you do? Well, what you should do is fly above the landing aircraft's path of flight, because his vortices are generated right here. They sink below the aircraft like so. And you want to land beyond the point where his nose wheel touches the ground. Now, lift is on his wings until his nose wheel touches the ground. So when you're landing behind a large aircraft, the pilot should avoid wake turbulence by staying above the large aircraft's final path and landing beyond the aircraft's touchdown point, like so. Now let's assume you're departing behind a heavy aircraft. Let's take a look at what you do here. As soon as that big aircraft's nose wheel leaves the ground, his vortices begin, and they drift behind the aircraft to descend like so. So when you're departing behind a heavy aircraft, the pilot should avoid wake turbulence by maneuvering the aircraft above and upwind of the heavy aircraft, like so. So if you're in a Cessna 150, you'd like to outclimb this 727, you'll play heck out climbing the 727, so you want to avoid his path of flight by turning away.
Hold on. No, don't mess that.
Now here's an airplane just about to come into ground effect. Now the thing you need to know about ground effect is an airplane actually flies better within about a wingspan of the ground. And that can cause it to float, and float, and float, and float, and float. And that is one of the problems with ground effect. Now why does an airplane fly better when it's within about a wingspan of the ground? Well, here's why. Normally, when an airplane is flying, we talked about the fact that there's high pressure underneath the wing, relative low pressure on top of the wing. And we also said that anytime you have this pressure differential, some of the molecules from the high pressure area are going to try and make their way around the wingtip and destroy lift on top of the wings. Well, anytime an airplane is flying, some of the lift on top of the wing is actually being destroyed in that fashion. But when an airplane gets within about a wingspan of the ground interferes with the ability of the air to make its way around the wingtip. And some of the lift that would have been destroyed is no longer being destroyed when the airplane's within about a wingspan of the ground, and that is called ground effect. So on the FA exam, you need to know that ground effect is the result of the interference of the surface of the Earth with the airflow patterns about an airplane. And an airplane actually flies more efficiently in ground effect. Now, two big problems in ground effect. First of all, if you're taking off in ground effect may result in your becoming airborne before reaching recommended takeoff speed. Now, the airplane will fly, but it may have a hard time climbing out of ground effect. And therefore, if you take off too soon, you can actually wind up using a lot more runway to get airborne. So ground effect may result in becoming airborne before reaching recommended takeoff speed, and this is really a problem at high-altitude airports. They had a guy who took off one time at Lake Tahoe. It has about 5,000 foot altitude. Sometimes it gets up to 90, maybe 100 degrees at Lake Tahoe. Tremendous density altitudes at Lake Tahoe. Well, this guy took off at Lake Tahoe, and his pilot technique for taking off had always been to look outside the window, see if the runway was going by fast enough. And he'd say, oh, that looks fast enough for me, and he'd jerk back on the wheel and pull the airplane off. Now, the problem is the airplane could fly in ground effect, but there's no way in the world the guy could make the airplane climb that way. So what happens to him is he flies the whole length of the runway about 5 feet above the ground and hits a tree at the other end. That guy staggered out of that airplane and said, ground effect caused that accident. Well, in a sense, he's right, but it's not ground effect that caused that accident. Ground effect doesn't cause accidents. What causes accidents in airplanes? Pilots cause accidents, and the pilot caused that accident by allowing the airplane to become airborne before reaching recommended takeoff speed. Now, let's talk about it. Would you say ground effect increases or decreases lift? Well, it increases lift. The airplane flies better in ground effect. And does ground effect increase or decrease drag? It decreases drag. And so, therefore, if you have any excess speed on landing, you're going to have considerable floating. So could ground effect cause floating? Sure it could, because the induced drag decreases. Therefore, any excess speed at the point of flare may cause considerable floating. So ground effect causes floating on landing, and floating due to ground effect will be most realized during an approach to land when you're less than how much above the ground? Less than 1 wingspan above the surface. So ground effect can cause you to become airborne too soon, and you're going to have floating on landing when the aircraft is less than the wingspan above the surface. Well, now, believe it or not, you and I have covered what the FAA wants you to know about aerodynamics on the FAA written exam. So now you're qualified to understand how with just a little bit of money, you can make the airplane do something like this.